Good afternoon to the in-person participants, but also for those attending online this first BridgeGap Talk Series. Anti-Corruption in Progress is an initiative to share findings and research that BridgeGap members are conducting on corruption topic. We start this series with Saverio Di Giorno. He will present in a joint paper with other BridgeGap members and on the measurement of construction-based corruption with satellite data. One of the most important mission of BridgeGap is to find new more accurate measures of corruption and anti-corruption as well. So I'll leave the floor to Saverio, who is postdoc research fellow at the University of Pisa. He is PhD in economics from University of Parthenope Naples. He will be presenting today this joint project. And then Professor Lucio Picci from University of Bologna will be the one discussing the topic. Also, people online in person can participate during the discussion. I leave the floor to Saverio for a 20 minutes presentation of the paper. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you this co-authored paper that, to be honest, I started before to join with you in BridgeGap and co-authored with Joras of Utrecht University and Professor Francesco Busato from University of Parthenope. And it's kind of measurement paper, you know, measurement of very specific kind of corruption, as I can show you. It's an alternative method to measure construction-related corruption. So first of all, why to spend more time into create a new kind, to propose a new kind of measures? As you know, as we mentioned before, we have hundreds of indicators to measure corruption. Why to add one more? And first of all, because it's, I think, we think a relevant kind of corruption. And because when the corruption is so well entrenched, because this is the case that we are looking for, when the corruption is so well entrenched in local institution, at the point that it can influence the public spending and the misallocate fund. So there are a lot of cases documented by journal investigative source and also academic. For example, you have the EU funds in public works that can be misallocate and create useless public infrastructure or higher amount of buildings or hotels and restaurants respect the real need of that place. So you can have different, these are Italy examples. We have, this is in Campania, the so-called Villaggio Coppola. It is a huge, enormous settlement, completely abandoned now. But we have also in the north of Italy example of the public work and public building that now are not required from the area, or in the long run we can have consequences in terms of a distorted development of the areas because of this distorted competition, different costs, and different resources put in the construction sector respect the requirement of the business cycle of that area. And yeah, also this is another consequence, is a pretty artistic architecture that we have in Calabria that we call the Stairway to Heaven, and it's a stairway in the middle of nowhere. And you know, what is the real goal of this stuff in the middle of nowhere? But anyway, we can measure this kind of corruption. Probably yes. This is a little spoiler of our proposal of measure. And so now let's start from the initial part of our story and try to see how we can, why we propose this measure. So I will be very brief on this part of literature review because we talk a lot of this part of the story and the different kind of indicator about corruption, perception-based indicator, objective indicator, that focus on proxy of corruption. For example, we have this example that focus on the public work cost of Lucio Picci of some years ago on public work in Italy, and this is another example. But we have different kind of methodology to measure directly or indirectly the corruption. But we start from the public procurement indicators that nowadays are considered one of the most credible approach to measure this kind of corruption. But one of the theoretical assumption of this kind of indicator is that the market without corruption is competitive. What happened in the peripheral area or in the very small market when the market is not really competitive, also without corruption? That probably also the public procurement indicator could be biased. It's a typical example of the south of Italy when we have a small market where the suppliers are completely controlled by organized crime, and so you have that all the suppliers of the chain can rotate and divide the market so that in order to avoid anti-mafia scrutiny. It's the organized crime is a particular evident case, but it's not the only one. In the rest of Europe, in peripheral area, there are cases in which the single bid or the other proxy of corruption based on the public procurement indicator could be biased. This is a particular, there are some recent network analysis in which here, for example, you have an example of very diversified market with competitive and very competitive market. And this is very controlled by when for example, the municipality use the same suppliers and divide by rotation. And so how can measure if you do not have anomalous behavior that signal this component? So our idea is to focus on the consequences, because you have that an inefficient spending toward construction sector. That is one of the two main sectors involved in this kind of corruption. The other sector is the waste management. In at least literature says that waste management and construction sector are mostly involved in this kind of corruption. We focus on construction industry, and due to the long presence of corruption in the local institution, we expect that the amount of built-up land surface is more than can be expected, more that can be justified by the area's actual requirement. So this is our hypothesis, and now let's go to the econometric challenge to test our hypothesis. Because first of all, we have to try to consider all the possible explanatory factors to the amount of built-up land. So all the possible legal factors, so the demographic characteristic, the business cycle characteristic, and so on. And then focus on residuals. So what is unexplained? If this unexplained part is too much, probably we have a proxy, something that is going wrong. And then as test, we start to test if these residuals are interesting, insensitive, in some way correlated with the standard measure of corruption. So first of all, we consider a huge amount of possible explanatory factor of build-up land. So geomorphological characteristic like coastal area, internal area, the level on the sea, but also demographic one, so population, and also the composition of the population, the elderly and so on, and the socioeconomic, so level of urbanization, gross domestic production, and sector specialization. Yeah, the main challenge is try to not be underfitted, but also to not overfitted, put everything, also because of problem of endogeneity, that to include someone that is correlated with corruption. We use fixed effect models in order to control for all constant over the time characteristics, so for example, coastal or internal area, and we perform some machine learning based model, like a random forest, to find the parsimonious model, so-called parsimonious model, so the best model to explain variability, but also with less possible amount of variables. Because the idea is that if you can explain as better as possible the variability with few variables, you can extend also to different kind of areas that have no so big database. So I will be very brief on this part, because we start from Italy, because Italy have a lot of possible database to compare corruption and different kind of corruption. And we run different kind of fixed effect model, very simple, just with, for example, population and degree of urbanization, more complex model with a lot of characteristics, just with population. Also, we test with this variable that is called expected budget, that in Italy is computed by OpenCivitas at municipal level, and is the amount of budget that that municipality is expected to have. It's also used to compute the amount of EU funds or internal funds that should be considered for that place, and they compute a very complex indicator, a composite indicator with a lot of characteristics. But the first interesting and nice thing, at least for us, is the R square, that it's very similar for all this model, in the sense that we are able to explain at least 80% of variability within municipality, also with the more easy model, with the easier models. And very important thing, that this performance is at this level, just at municipal level. If you run the same, and if you apply it, for example, at the regional level, the performance is not so good. And the second interesting thing is that all our residuals are highly correlated. So given these two interesting things, we decided to use the most simplest possible model with just population, because it's a variable that you find everywhere and you can extend our result everywhere. And now the most tricky part, try to see what we are measuring, because these are our residuals. This is the mafia presence at municipal level index computed by University of Milano Cattolica, and this is the geographical distribution of the solved municipality. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in the case of the geographical distribution of our residuals, purple are very strange residual in positive residuals, and yellow is the negative residuals. So what we are interested in is the positive residual, very strange positive residuals. In the case of the mafia presence index of Cattolica, you have the red areas are with more mafia presence, and they are decile, I think, yes. And the dissolved municipalities, it's very intuitive. Yeah, you have that some municipalities have been dissolved one time, twice time. I think that 3 times is the level, or the highest level. So what we can have that with the mafia index, we have some overlap and some good overlap and some bad overlap, but it's expectable in the sense that we are not measured the presence of mafia at all, in the sense that, for example, the portfolio of mafia investment have a lot of things. So, for example, we are not seeing at money laundering or the waste management or other things, or the reinvestment in restaurant and so on. We have some kind of good overlap for the kind of organized crime that work a lot on the construction sector, for example, in Sicily or in Puglia, and some kind of interesting thing in Emilia-Romagna here. And yeah, this is a good overlap I show in the next slide with the dissolved municipal. We also try to check if there is a negative correlation with the women percentage in the local council at the municipal level, because there is a branch of literature that suggests that women act like a corruption cleaner. And so we can expect a negative correlation, since that if we have a lot of women in the council, probably the level of misallocation of funds is fewer, so we cannot have strange residuals. Yeah, this is a very brief focus with the dissolved municipalities. This is the size of residual distribution. So in the right tail, you have very strange residuals, and this is the betas. We repeat the regression for each decile. And fortunately, we have that for very strange residual, the association, the level of the beta increase. And so here we have dissolved municipality 2 or 3 times, and these are the very strange residuals. And also we compare the amount of build-up land of dissolved municipality and not dissolved municipality. We can see that in dissolved municipality, there is a strange higher amount of build-up land. Yeah. We try to extend also to the rest of Europe, just to try to understand if it works also in other place. But when you want to extend in the rest of Europe, you have two main problems. First of all, a kind of corruption data at municipal level to compare with. And so, because if you compare at the regional level, the performance is not so good. And the other stuff is to find different kind of source. We used this index of Transparency Institute, computed by Transparency Institute, that is an indicator of good spending. And we have a correlation, a negative correlation and significant negative correlation with the good spending, and also a negative correlation with the transparency. It's based on the public procurement data, this index computed by Transparency Institute. We did this correlation for Germany, Spain, and France. For some countries better, for others less, but the comparison with Italian result, it's not so immediate because the data of the public procurement computed by Transparency Institute are at the regional or provincial level, not at the municipal level. So it's not so immediate to compare, but there is some kind of significant correlation. So to sum up, we have a kind of phenomenon that we call it widespread or entrenched corruption that seems to be relevant, not only in Italy. In Italy, it's more evident, but not only in Italy. We have that the construction sector is one of the main involved in this kind of corruption, entrenched corruption at the local level, and that in this case, probably also objective and credible indicator like the public procurement indicator could be biased or could be distorted because you have that. You have not some kind of anomalous behavior just because the market is not competitive. So, good limitation and good news. We have a quite simple methodology, easy to extend to different kind of contexts, different kind of countries. Also for countries that are not so well equipped to recognize and to measure this kind of corruption. But of course, it's in some way related with organized crime presence, but not completely, and it requires very specific condition and very specific consequence in the sense that require a long presence of corruption at the local level, so that this consequence, the amount of build-up land can be evident. So yeah, this is top and down of this working paper. And okay, I think that it's enough. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Saverio, for this presentation. We know how construction is pivotal also in telling us how much corruption kills as well in time of extreme weather events, climate change. We know how the quality of construction is key in predicting also the final impact, the consequences of this phenomenon. And now I leave the floor to Lucio for a discussion. Then also for those who are online, thanks a lot. There are a lot of people online participating. If you have any questions, raise your hands or just write your question in the chat. We also have some co-author. I see Joras. He was intervening to respond to the discussion. Okay, Lucio.
This one, whatever. Can we go back to the slides, please? Well, thank you. Can we go back to the presentation? Well, first of all, Saverio, thank you very much. This is an interesting paper with a smart idea of trying to come up with a measure of corruption which is based on satellite data and on what we would call, what sometimes we call soil consumption. And certainly, as you said, there are good reasons to go that way because we know that soil consumption is an activity that may be linked with organized crime and also with corruption. Just an example which is not related with Italy, thinking about the big corruption scandals that took place in Spain circa 2009, 2010. There was a big problem in the so-called ley del suelo, the law to give allotments of land to people to build. In that case, it was a huge case of corruption, mainly in municipalities, because municipalities are the ones that have the right to change the destination of that. And actually, let me make a second comment, which I just cannot avoid making. It's the amazing beginning of a great movie, 1961, 1962, probably, which is by Risi, Le mani sulla città, the hands on a city, which starts precisely by showing this imaginary city, which is, I think, Naples, in fact, by seeing this constructor with politicians saying, you know, the city is not here, but this is precisely what you can make. You can make it happen. You know, you just need a law regulation that makes that renders this space apt for construction. So you really got something which is important, and my comments are more on the implementation, and actually I will try to give some suggestion to you and to your co-authors, which boil down to the idea of further, in my opinion, there is room for further validation of the measure. Let me just start with, if it is possible, to go to the pictures of Italy. You know, the one with the residuals based measure. All right, okay, you know, the one on the left, if we zoom in, we see that this is a municipal level. I'm seeing this in my screen more zoomed in. And so, for example, you know, I see that there is no really north-south divide. Well, there are, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying that should be, but there is a divide which I think needs to be considered with some attention. So, for example, if you look at Emilia-Romagna, which is, you know, the region from Rimini, Bologna, and so forth, you see that you have dark spots where you have the capoluoghi di provincia, the provincial capitals. And then also, if you move a little bit, you have Ravenna also, which is the big, the kind of, well, it's too small for you to see, but you know, it's on the Adriatic coast. And then you have many, so 2 points here. One is the provincial capitals. You do control for population, but also it seems to me that you may have a problem there, because, you know, if you have a provincial capital, you have a demand for buildings which has to do with the administrative and political role of the city and economic role of the city. So you will have the public buildings, you will have the big supermarkets, which are big, you know, so I guess that they make some difference when you go to, I don't know exactly, I mean, how you build the measure using satellite data. You have this stuff which, I mean, is that linked with corruption? Well, you know, you got to be careful in a way, because, and then if you go to the mountains, then you see that along the mountains, you have very little corruption. What does that mean? So that to me also indicates probably the opportunity of being a little bit more specific about the definition of your measure of corruption. And in particular, this is kind of a fixation of mine. I think that there is a difference which is underplayed in the literature, which is between the amount of corruption and the propensity to corrupt. I mean, in the middle of nowhere, we'll have very little corruption because no reason. I mean, there is no transactions that are amenable to corruption. So that thing also. And second, you see again the provincial capitals, and you probably see the tourist destinations there. It seems to me like if you take a place, the municipality of Gatteo a Mare, I'm sure that no one will know about that. It's a small municipality which is not far from Rimini, so you can understand what I'm hinting at, which has part of it is on the Via Emilia, you know, the main street that goes from Rimini to Milano, that was made originally by the Romans and probably using something that was pre-existent to some degree. And then you have the part which is Amare, you know, which is a few kilometers away, which is just, you know, a stretch of concrete hotels and construction. So is that corruption? I mean, obviously you have more buildings than any, people don't live there. I mean, you know, in the winter is empty, or not totally empty as it used to be 30 years ago maybe, but quite empty. So there you have questions that I think that you may want to address, and the way to go, in my opinion, is to look more carefully at you know, the differences that you may have here when you see that within a few kilometers you may have a very dark and a very undark, a very a light-colored area, which begs for interpretation. I don't know how to go about that. Maybe working a little bit more on the controls. You may put quadratic forms, for example. I guess stuff like that. Work on the functional form, where it would be easy. Even before getting into fancy AI stuff, I would really work on some kind of specification using a regression model, as you do, by the way. I mean, I'm not. And yeah, so work more on the validation, try to interpret and compare that. If I agree that it is very complicated because we do not have other measures of corruption at the municipal level, but you may want to possibly aggregate by region and compare with available measures at the regional level to see whether we get some similar story or different stories. So that's the way I would go about it. But again, very interesting, very smart idea, and worth continuing working on that and try to get it in. That's obviously a draft. I mean, it's a work in progress. So that you presented as such, and so it has potentials, and hopefully these suggestions you may find them of some use. Hopefully, that's it.
There are also some questions online. One of them is, are there any specific factor linking corruption to space production? For example, the money laundering process may be using real estate market more intensively to clean organized crime proceeds. Some types of corruption may be more related to this money laundering scheme than others. Okay, thanks for the question. There are any other questions from here, the floor in person, and also line? Raise your hands if you want to ask some questions, also line. Let's see, or we can leave the floor to Saverio to reply to this first round of questions.
Okay. Thank you, Lucio, for your super interesting suggestions and comments that are not completely unexpected, in sense that we also noticed that probably we under-evaluate or over-evaluate, depending on the region, on the area, and we try to check with quadratic form, and also, for example, trying to correct errors by clustering, or try do some hierarchical model by province. And the thing is that the result does not change so much, in the sense that probably when you use some quadratic form, we are correct, for example, for big metropolitan area or for capital cities, but the correlation between this kind of residual and the other form are very, very similar. So I think that the best way to see in a comparative way all this kind of model, and try to see like a upper bound or lower bound depending on the characteristic of the area. About this is about the possible other it's super interesting to work more about the level of corruption and the propensity to be corrupted. I think that this could be an interesting suggestion, but that, yeah, for example, Emilia-Romagna is one of the tricky region, in sense that is also, this is Emilia-Romagna for not Italian audience, that it's also for the Mafia Presa Index, we have quite good result, in sense that we have some overlap on the cost. It's in the middle of the first standard deviation residual that compute day of Cattolica, also because a lot of reinvestment of money of 'Ndrangheta is in Emilia-Romagna, but probably in our case is over-evaluated. We are in some sense, because, for example, we have Rome that is not over-evaluated respect to other capital province, or we have here Umbria and Perugia that we have hotspot, but are also mountain areas respected, for example, that Calabria that probably is under-evaluated, but also because it's a very mountain region, and so we have also only Reggio Calabria in this part of Ionic area. So yeah, I think that the best way to read our residuals is to compare different kind of functional forms and different kind of correction, and see what change in what area, and try to see like an upper bound, a lower bound. And the easy way to also to answer to your suggestion is that it's a first attempt to have at this level of granularity of data a measure, so okay, probably should be correct to other kind of measure, but it's a way also to see in complementary way this measure with other kind of measure. And I don't remember the question, Anna. Yep. Okay. To be honest, we struggled a lot with Joras to think also about the process that generate these consequences. Is only about the public and the right way to spending funds to the construction sector, or is more indirect, like in the chat, through the real estate or through reinvestment in real estate? And probably yes, there are multiple different causes of this kind of consequences. And it's also, yeah, Lucio, are completely right to you that probably one of the solution to your suggestion, try to understand how to define this result. In sense, is really, in strictly sense, corruption is, or it's more about a very strange way to spending money that in most of the case are related with corruption or to a risk of corruption in the local institution. So yeah, there are probably other kind of sources respect that what I mentioned about the construction sector, but because we are not focused on the precise causes of this phenomenon, but just on the consequences of this of what happened. So the idea is that if there is a widespread and very long presence of corruption in the local institution, it's more like to have a very strange way to spend money, and so misallocation of funds. And so what we can expect is to see some visible consequences, and we try to see if these visible consequences are a way to create a very granular measure, and also a very simple way to extend this measure also to different contexts that are not only Italy, but also because we have satellite data, very precise level of granularity all over the world. Probably another kind of discussion that could be seen on this paper is try to understand when and where this method could be more like to be applicable. If, for example, in the development country or in the developed areas, where this method fit better to measure this kind of process. And this could be another further discussion about our proposal.
Can I add, it's not really, it's a comment from the top of my head, actually, but I was thinking about it. So don't take it as a suggestion, okay? Just an idea, but you use satellite data. And so you have a snapshot. I mean, you say 2022, whatever, whenever the data is from. You could actually, in principle, not in this paper, but use the Italian military maps. Because if you take, the original Italian, the most granular Italian military maps, and they date back to the beginning of the last century, more or less. They were made they're still made by the Istituto Geografico Militare, which is in Florence. And they have black rectangles for each building. You find them easily online. I mean, you can find them, for example, for the 1930s on some American website. So, I don't know if that could be an idea for future research, not for this one, because you could compute, if you get someone to analyze those data and get a measure, interpret, maybe AI again, I don't know, of those rectangles, you have every single damn building there. I'll show you an example later on. I mean, you can just download it and you see what I mean. Yeah. So there you could have the difference between 1930s easily, because those are online. Otherwise, you go to Florence and whichever date the satellite data has, and the difference could be informative also, because whatever. Yeah.
Joras, have you tried?
Yes, can I react? I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Go ahead, Joras.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, thanks a lot, Lucio. Yeah, I think you have the critique that indeed is right, that when looking at the data, it's exactly what we also did, starting to look at differences between, for instance, this mafia presence index map and our map. And indeed, you see differences. And I think there are a couple of important observations there. First of all, when you are comparing you also have to realize that the mafia presence index might have some biases somewhere. So if there is a difference between the two maps, we don't know whether we are wrong, they are wrong, or maybe both. But at the same time, what I found most remarkable about our results, and that's also what you hinted upon, is that the phenomenon seems very municipal. It seems really at the very local level, which makes sense because whether somewhere can be built and how corruption manifests is at a very local level. So you could have a little village where there is entrenched corruption, where there is way too many buildings than needed just to get public money into private hands. But the village next door might not have any of these problems. And that's also what seems to be indicated in our map, and something that I don't see that often being mentioned in the literature. So that was to me very surprising, but directly gives us also a main challenge. Because that means if we want to do this analysis well, we need data at the municipal level. And that is surprisingly hard to find for all kinds of factors that we were also concerned about, that it could influence our results. You mentioned tourism. It's indeed also one of the things we looked at. And this seems to be indeed giving a bias. And it makes sense. There might be buildings in certain municipalities, not because the people need them, but because the tourists need them. There might be more hotels, there might be more museums, these kind of things. We cannot correct for that because we don't have data about tourism at the municipal level. That makes it so hard to correct for this. We basically saw two main biases when we looked at the results. One is tourism indeed. The other one is when there is a certain industry thriving in a certain region that requires a lot of buildings. And most specifically, that is glass houses. So there is a region in Spain, Costa Plástico, where a lot of glass houses are. And we have a similar region in the Netherlands where there is a lot of glass houses. All of these glass houses with satellite data look like buildings, and they are massive. And they are completely unproportional to the amount of people that actually live in that region. So these two type of biases we very clearly see, but we don't have the right data to really correct for them well. You also mentioned that, for instance, mountains can influence to what extent you can build. And indeed, that is confirmed throughout the literature, that the landscape determines to what extent how big buildings are and how easy it is to build buildings. The thing is, we correct for that. So we use data over time. And by using these fixed effects, we basically correct for all the geographical factors that are in our analysis. So we correct automatically for the fact that landscapes differ. And so in that way, we try to correct for them. Thank you a lot for your comments, Lucio.
Yeah, thank you, Joras. Any other questions? Yes, we have Alina.
Thank you. Question is related to the theory on this, which is based on. I mean, you started with grand and petty corruption, but after this discussion about one village which might be very corrupt, looking at patterns of spending, and another which looks less corrupt, does this, actually redeem this classification of grand versus petty corruption, or it does seem that it's a bit of a more continuous kind of?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, probably you're right that slide was a little bit misleading. It's just a very, not a specific slide, just about different kind of definition of corruption, just to introduce the question that discussed with the Lucio. If we are proposing an adding measure of corruption, that is completely useless if it's the same of the other kind of corruption. But the theory that we use to start to think this kind of measurement paper is mainly all the literature that follow the public procurement stuff. And so the public spending and the quality of spending at the local level. So the local institution and the correlation with the corruption at the local institution level. Yeah, that slide probably for the next presentation I will skip that slide about petty administrative and the blah 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 corruption. Yeah, you're right. It's just to say, okay, we propose a new indicator, but we really need of a new indicator, and we are trying to convince the audience that yes, we need of a new and adding indicator just because it's a quite different indicator.
There is Manuel as well. Go ahead, Manuel.
Okay, so I think it's a great project. I really like, I think, yeah, like studying more these sectoral level aspects of corruption is really important. And I think you have, right, also the opportunity maybe in another paper. So same caveat applies that Lucia mentioned, but it would be nice to have like a more complete story about why corruption in construction, right? Because it has some particularities, right? There's a lot of like regulation involved, a lot of people employed, right? So while the construction is taking place, afterwards it might not be used, right? But you have a lot of people employed. So that might be, you know, if you want to have more of a political story, right? And relate this to clientelism and all these things, I think it would also be a contribution, right? And then especially if you have like more historical data, you could, you know, like look at preference votes and different kinds of, or levels of control in municipal governments, right? And so, I don't know, like different directions that I think would be interesting to see this explored, and also the relationship between like organized crime, control of labor unions, and the different aspects. And something that like reading the paper reminded me of this literature on unfinished projects, right? And also, you know, like the inefficiencies of these, and whether like it would be possible, like whether it's something doable to have some kind of measure of unfinished projects, right? And then to be able to really corroborate your measure. I think it would be nice. But something that, yeah, like that for me wasn't super clear in the paper, but I think your co-author was also mentioning, right? It would be for you to explain more the temporal dimension of the measure, right? Whether this, you know, whether do you see interesting patterns in terms of like looking at the variation over years, whether this is something else that it's, you know, given the detail, I don't know how far back are the satellites good enough to be able to really measure the things you're doing, but like whether the level of resolution, right? I think nowadays it's like 30 meters by 30 meters, also some of the grid, right, that the satellite can observe. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to also explore the temporal dimension, but also, yeah, like be nice to hear more from you.
Yeah, a very good question. Thank you for that. Yeah, I skip on this technical question about the dimension, the temporal dimension of the paper, but we also try to run the regression with the change over the time, and the result are the model not perform as well, because we in these residuals, since are fixed effect, we look just to the difference in terms of level and not over the time. When we use the over the time possible techniques to regression, we have worse performance. The solution that we tried is to use like a different picture over the time, and so use a different starting point of our residual, because we put different years, and this could be a way to see, also to be more precise in the sense that probably, yeah, you know that in some areas of the south, here, for example, in Sicily or in Reggio Calabria, we have very strange residual, but we are not able at the moment to see when that process started. For example, could be that, like, for example, in Palermo, you have the sack of Palermo, that it's a big amount of misallocation of funds, and you have the consequences now. Also, the Villaggio Coppola in Campania that I showed before, but the causes are very early and before. So a way to control for all this, the variation of the time, is to have different picture using different kind of database that start at different point, just to be more precise. But yeah, I think the focus on the over the time change could be a further and investigation, just to see if our data could be more and more useful.
Okay. Thanks also, Saverio. Any other questions? Also online participants? No? I mean, I have two very quick questions. I mean, first of all, don't remember whether you are able to distinguish between private and public construction. If you have any proxies of public construction, I don't know, you can utilize how many students so you can tell you if there are any schools or infrastructure. Because, I mean, it's crucial. I mean, you mentioned the sack of Palermo, but most of these cases are of private construction. It's not a construction booming due to public funds. Okay, first of all. And the second is, I really love anomalies, okay? And I mean, you explain, a kind of divide across areas of Italy, but what about the divide within mafia regions? I mean, I see in Sicily, I mean, the mafia presence index is a very good index, but we know that there is a huge heterogeneity in terms of mafia specializations. I mean, there are mafia groups specializing in construction other than never dealt with construction because they are more dealing with narcotics. So they are not interested in building nothing. So there is a huge variation on it. I know this will make more Italian based, your paper,
Yeah.
but it's not, because if we think about at the moment, the growing literature on organized crime now is on the commodification of mafia. So we have the mafia sense in India, in Indonesia, in East Asia. This is a very important topic. So how how monopolies, mafia monopolies in legal sector, legitimate sector can manipulate the market. And I think this is, I mean, I would really love to have some explanation of why in many mafia strongholds in southern Italy, we don't have such an important corruption in the construction. This would be very interesting in a way.
Yeah, okay. Let's start from the second question that I have a more clear answer. Because we talked also with Milano Riccardi of Cattolica about this different kind of specialization and different kind of result and variation within region. And one possible explanation is that also, for example, if you look at Calabria and you have 'Ndrangheta, you have very under evaluation, or probably in this case, but this probably because 'Ndrangheta is not specialized in the construction sector in this kind of industry in Calabria, but much more in Emilia Romagna. And respect, for example, yeah, in Reggio Calabria you have an hotspot because you have, and also there is an overlap of also with a lot of judicial evidence. But for example, I think to the province of Cosenza, of Valencia, that are here in the north for not so regional audience, and here we have a lot of reinvestment in other sector on with dragon, with other stuff, and also the geomorphological characteristic of that region. Yeah, because we have a very old population, a very scarce population, and so you have that in our regression does not sum up in so evident way. And we also check about the portfolio investment of organized crime, or we try, I don't remember exactly, but we see that there is a kind of overlap when that with the mafia presence index. When the is known that the portfolio invested mafia is more focused on the construction sector, or with that kind of clan of organized crime is more focused on that sector. And there is a kind of overlap in the sense that also, for example, yeah, also for the mafia index, for example, you can see in the north of Calabria, in the northwest of Calabria, they result less in this term. And about the first question, public and private, yeah, if I remember correctly, the definition of the amount of build-up land of Eurostat, and because there are merged projects with satellite data that are that is used also Eurostat, we are considering public work and private houses, not, for example, industry. So, for example, if you have a gas or something like that, or a farm, we have not in this case, but so we have both this case. And yeah, you are right. Should be interesting try to distinguish between, for example, a huge bridge or a lot of street, and also just to private house. But yeah, for the moment, I don't know how to try a proxy to distinguish between these two things. In most of the case, yeah, it's a very vague answer, but for example, with touristic investment or touristic, we have the sector specialization in the controls, and so we can expect that yeah, that, for example, an hotel is an empty, for example, during the winter, if it's a sea coast, an empty place, but we can expect that it's justified by the gross domestic production, by the sector specialization. So in some way, we try to balance different kind of control, but yeah, again, we know that this is the best as possible. Also because with different functional form and different kind of controls, the result does not change so much.
Okay. If there are no any other questions, thanks again, Saverio, and also Joras Online for having presented this very interesting paper. Thanks, Lucio, for for the discussion, and thanks to also the online participants. There are a lot of online participants from different backgrounds, I can see. So thanks a lot. And if you want to reach Saverio for any clarification, I mean, he will leave his email and his contacts for further discussion. Okay, thanks, Luis, for hosting the meeting, actually. Okay. Alina. Yeah, the next meeting will be in a month, and with different topics we'll cover. From today we were on measurement. Next meeting probably will be in Pisa, with a focus on criminal justice system and anti-corruption and prosecuting high-level politicians around the globe. And okay, see you next meeting.
Thank you very much, and we will announce the next meeting online in time.